Hey, it's Matt, your average gamer, and for this one, we're going to be doing Siluria's Tree. This is a really interesting and fun weapon art. This was something that was really enjoyable, has a fairly good amount of range, and it will turn you into a very powerful holy build that has, again, a really good amount of range and power. Again, my character is currently on Journey 9, so we're at New Game Plus 7, max scaling, and after we beat up the Draconic Tree Sentinel here, which by the way, it does pretty impressive damage, I'm going to show you where to get Siluria's Tree as well, where you can get that Deep Root Deaths, the exact location, and it's a really fun weapon to use. And this one is boosted by the Godfrey Icon. It is chargeable, and as you can see on screen here, the range is substantial. That's really the biggest benefit here. It does both holy and physical damage, and it fits obviously with the faith build because it builds off a lot of faith and then strength stat as your secondary. Let's go into where the location is to get Siluria's Tree. Now, to get Siluria's Tree, you do have to fight a Crucible Knight, and as with all of them, they're incredibly aggressive. I recommend, like here, if you're using a faith build, you might as well use the Blasphemous Blade, able to take them down fairly quickly. Even with the aggressive move set, they don't have a ridiculous amount of HP. And I actually find this variant a little easier than Orduvis because Orduvis, I think you have to fight like two of them. Some people may say differently here because obviously this one has a little bit more as far as ranged attack goes, but I felt like the HP and the resistances and the fact that you're not dealing with a shield makes it a little bit easier to fight. And again, this only took one try. The Blasphemous Blade is really something I'd recommend for this, and obviously you recommend the Blasphemous Blade for the majority of the game because it's so powerful, but the thing about it is you may get bored of it occasionally, so obviously there's a lot of other cool faith stuff you can do as well. Let's show on the map here shortly where you get Siluria's Tree. That was the drop, and then behind it is the Crucible Armor set that we'll be using as well. And it goes with a really good theme, and this way at least we have the armor set, so we get a really cool armor set and weapon out of this whole area. And again, this is Deep Root Depths, and it's nothing too crazy to get. The only downside is that you do have to fight those dual gargoyle bosses or go through the shunning grounds, and those can be a little bit difficult to go through, but once you're here, it's not too bad. And for me, it wasn't an incredibly difficult boss. The first place I took this, by the way, was Caled to test it on the dragons out here and to see how much damage we can do to come up with a really powerful build for Siluria's Tree. Now, I want to mention real quick, there's an awesome Discord attached in the link below. There's a ton of people on. I think we're at 380 people now. And if you need items and stuff, by the way, everybody's been incredibly nice. So it's a great place to at least have a chance to get the items you need and trade with others and whatnot. So be sure to join that Discord. It's an awesome Discord. Be sure to hit that subscribe button too. We'll be joining an awesome Elden Ring community, and let's get back to the weapon, which does substantial damage with the Godfrey Icon and the charged ability on the Ash of War. This is a very powerful one. Even though it is holy damage, it does split a little bit between physical and does substantial amount of damage overall. By the way, the Ash of War itself is buffed by a couple different talismans. We came up with a really good setup for it, but the other thing to mention about it is the damage on the Ash of War comes from your faith stat, your strength stat, only a little bit of dexterity, and then the weapon level. So if you're somebody that has a really high level character, it's something where you can invest a whole bunch of strength, a whole bunch of faith in, maybe even minimum or middling dex, and you'll end up with a really good amount of damage on the Ash of War itself. And then obviously make sure the weapon is up to +10 if you can do that. For this video, I had it at +9 because I didn't have an Ancient Somber, but ideally you'd want it at +10. This way you can make the most out of the Ash of War itself, and how the scaling is a little bit split, and it has scaling very similar to Marika's Hammer. I'll also, by the way, mention that I just did a video on Marika's Hammer, and with the same exact stats, with the same type of setup around 150, you can use both of these weapons because they scale very similar. So here, by the way, I want to talk about a little bit more as far as the weapon itself goes. Obviously, it's a spear. You can use that behind a shield too. If you're somebody that's a really high level too, you can also go with the shield and probably do this safely at a distance while being able to block too. There's a couple of different things you could do with this weapon. It is a very powerful one in terms of the Ash of War, and the AR on itself is fairly decent as well. Also, I always scale every weapon that I'm using in terms of how fun it is when I'm doing these builds and going through Elden Ring. This is one of the ones that was really fun. Maybe it's because I hadn't used it a lot, but it's very enjoyable being able to stand back, charge it, and then hit for a substantial amount of damage. Even if it is a little bit holy damage, which is obviously highly resisted, it's still a really fun and powerful weapon to use. Again, for my own testing, I'm not exactly 100% sure on the split between physical and holy, but obviously you do have a substantial amount of holy damage in there. I could say that you maybe have a substantial amount of physical damage too, but we're using generic buffs, so it's a little bit difficult to tell. Overall, though, it does do both. And let's show Deathrite birds, by the way, who get destroyed by this weapon art. So Deathrite birds take increased damage from Holy, so this is a fantastic weapon and weapon art to use against them. This is something that can wipe them off the map entirely, and it's incredibly powerful against them given the fact that, again, they take increased Holy damage. So it's definitely something you want to consider when you're fighting them, is Holy damage in general, but this weapon art specifically can absolutely chew through their HP, and once again, it is an absolute blast to use too. Let's show it on mobs and how well it handles that. And for mobs, this isn't a complete destroyer. This isn't something that's going to shred every single mob in the game. Obviously, something like the Sacred Relic Sword is going to absolutely destroy them very quickly compared to this, but it's still something you could do to take out mobs at a range and do substantial amount of damage to them too. As far as regular enemies in the game, Siluria's Tree is no exception to the majority of Ashes of War that can handle them with ease. And Siluria's Tree is something too where you can obviously use the regular attacks and jumping attacks and get fairly good AR out of it as well, and then the ranged attacks itself, as you can see on screen here, usually do massive damage. It can be a little bit challenging to time it right, and occasionally if you're on something that's a little bit different as far as elevation goes, it doesn't exactly hit because it has kind of a weird angle and lineup. But even so, it hits the majority of the time. That's not too much of a concern after all, and it's high damage at that. Let's get into equipment. This we have Siluria's Tree +9, preferably +10. Any seal will do. We have the Crucible Knight set on, Dragoncrest Great Shield Talisman, Sacred Scorpion Charm for the Holy Damage boost, Shard of Alexander for the weapon art, Godfrey Icon because it is chargeable, and then something like the Holy tier will boost this as well, and then the Faith tier, or you can go with the Defense tier too. For stats, this is really similar to Marika's Hammer. This is something, as I mentioned earlier in the video, that's going to scale mainly with your Faith stat, your Strength stat, and weapon level. So if you're around 150, these are really good stats to get a lot of damage out of the Ash of War. As you can see, I ended up with fairly good damage. And if you're really high level, you can up your Strength and Faith as much as possible to get even more damage out of this powerful and ranged Ash of War. Make sure you have a fairly good amount of Vigor as well, but we do have that Crucible Knight set on with Dragoncrest, so we have a good amount of physical resistance in this build too. Let's get into buffs. For buffs, nothing too crazy here, but we're going to drink our tier, which has the Holy tier in it first, and then we're going to use Golden Vow. You can throw in Blessings Boon if you want to, because that'll give you a little extra HP. It's always good to have. And then I'm using Howl or Shabriri to generically boost the weapon art by another 25% damage, which will help us a bit. Fill up your FP, and then you get to use that really cool and fun ranged weapon art. Hope that was enjoyable. I hope that's a little bit educational as far as the weapon. I was a little bit learning it as I go, but it is good to know that it is chargeable, boosted by the Godfrey Icon and Shard of Alexander. Between those two alone, you're going to get 30% more damage on a really cool and unique weapon art. Definitely be sure to join the Discord too. You're going to want to be a part of that awesome community that's been growing like crazy. As I mentioned, we're closing in on 400 people, which has been pretty awesome. And if you love overpowered PvE builds, be sure to check out all the awesome builds that are on my channel. Thanks for watching. As always, I will catch you guys there.